A city without a sky. London, 1952. A city still recovering from the scars of the Second World War. The Blitz had ended only 7 years prior, and the rubble of bombed-out buildings still lined the streets of the East End. But the enemy that was about to descend upon the capital was not carrying bombs. It didn't arrive with the sound of sirens. It arrived in silence. It was yellow, it was oily, and it was lethal. 5 days in December, the most powerful city in the world simply vanished. It wasn't just a fog, it was a phenomenon that challenged the very limits of human survival. Imagine a world where the sun never rises, where you cannot see your own hand held out in front of your face, where the very air you breathe tastes like rotting eggs and burns your throat like liquid fire. By the time the wind finally cleared the air on December 9th, 12,000 people were dead. This remains the deadliest environmental disaster in the history of the United Kingdom, a silent massacre that the government tried to hide for decades. Today, on Britain's forgotten streets, we are doing the ultimate deep dive. We are going hour by hour, street by street, into the Great Smog. Why did it happen? Who was responsible? And what was it like to spend 120 hours in a world where the light had died? Why London became a gas chamber. To understand the Great Smog, we have to look at what London was made of in the 1950s. It was a city powered by coal. Coal was everything. It heated the homes, it ran the massive power stations like Battersea and Bankside, and it fueled the thousands of factories that made London an industrial titan. But not all coal is created equal. Post-war Britain was broke. To pay off war debts, the government was exporting all the high-quality, clean coal to other countries. What was left for the British people was a low-grade, dirty variety called Nutty Slack. It was full of impurities, mainly sulfur. When you burned it, it didn't just give off heat. It gave off a thick, black, greasy smoke that smelled of sulfur dioxide. Then, on December 4th, the weather did something rare and catastrophic. A high-pressure system, an anticyclone, settled over London. Usually, warm air near the ground rises into the cold air above, carrying smoke away. But this time, a layer of warm air sat on top of the cold air, creating what scientists call temperature inversion. It was like a giant, invisible lid being placed over the entire Thames Valley. That evening, millions of Londoners came home from work and lit their coal fires. The smoke rose, hit that warm lid, and was forced back down. It had nowhere to go. It began to mix with the natural mist from the River Thames. But the sulfur in the smoke reacted with the water droplets in the fog to create sulfuric acid. London wasn't just being covered in smog. It was being sprayed with a fine mist of acid. The blackout of the streets. Friday, December 5th. The day the world changed. At first, people thought it was just a typical pea souper, the romanticized fog described by Charles Dickens. But by 10 a.m., the light began to fade. By noon, the sky was a bruised shade of amber. By 2 p.m., the street lights had to be turned on, but they were useless. Their glow was swallowed by the thick, yellow-black haze. This is where the forgotten streets became literal. Navigation became impossible. The London Underground was the only thing moving, but even there, the smog seeped into the tunnels. Above ground, the red double-decker buses, the icons of London, stopped dead. Conductors tried to walk in front of them with flaming torches, but the smoke was so thick they couldn't see the bus they were supposed to be leading. Imagine walking home on a street you've lived on for 20 years and suddenly having no idea where you are. People were found hours later, shivering and terrified, only 5 feet from their own front doors. They were feeling along the brickwork of buildings, counting the doors, counting the railings, desperate for a landmark. The silence was absolute. No engines, no horns, no shouting. Just the sound of muffled footsteps and a strange, rhythmic coughing that began to echo from every corner. Inside the houses, it was no better. The smog seeped through the cracks in the floorboards. It came down the chimneys. People described sitting in their kitchens and seeing a yellow haze hanging under the ceiling. Curtains turned black within hours. If you wore a white shirt to work, It was charcoal gray by the time you arrived. But the worst was yet to come. Because while the city was blinded, it was also being poisoned. The medical nightmare. By Saturday night, the hospitals were beginning to fill. But how do you get to a hospital when the ambulances can't see the road? Heroic drivers were leaning out of their windows, following the white lines on the road, or having a colleague walk in front with a torch. Some people were brought to A&E on flatbed carts, pulled by hand through the darkness. When they arrived, the doctors were horrified. This wasn't the flu. This was chemical warfare. The sulfuric acid was burning the delicate tissues of the lungs. The lungs would swell and fill with fluid, a condition called pulmonary edema. People were literally drowning on dry land. Their lips turned blue, cyanosis, as they gasped for oxygen that wasn't there. The elderly, the war veterans with damaged lungs, and the infants were the first to perish. But the government kept quiet. Even as the death rate doubled, then tripled, the official line was that there was nothing to worry about. But in the morgues, the truth was undeniable. Undertakers ran out of coffins. There are reports of bodies being stacked in back rooms of funeral parlors because the hearses couldn't drive to the cemeteries. The city was dying in the dark, and nobody outside of London even knew it was happening. And then there were the animals. The Smithfield Club's cattle show was in town. These were prize-winning bulls, massive and strong. One by one, they began to gasp and collapse. The farmers tried to create makeshift gas masks using sacks soaked in vinegar, but it was no use. 11 of the finest cattle in Britain died right there in their pens. When the vets opened them up, their lungs were destroyed. If it could kill a 1,000-pound bull, what was it doing to the children of the East End? The politics of death. While Londoners were dying, the halls of Westminster were filled with debate, but not about the smog. Winston Churchill was back in power, but he was an old man now, and his government was obsessed with the economy. To acknowledge that coal was killing the people was to acknowledge that the British industrial model was broken. Harold Macmillan, the Minister of Housing, initially dismissed the deaths. He told the press it was just an unfortunate weather event. They tried to blame an influenza outbreak. They didn't want to regulate the coal industry because it was too expensive. They suggested that people should just wear masks or stay indoors, ignoring the fact that the smog was already indoors. It was only when the smog lifted and the staggering statistics were published that the public outrage became too much to ignore. The initial report said 4,000 died. Later research proved it was 12,000. For comparison, that is more people than were killed in the Great Plague of London in some of its worst weeks. This was a man-made plague caused by greed, bad coal, and a government that looked the other way. The Clean Air Act and beyond. On December 9th, a cold wind finally blew in from the North Sea. The smog was pushed away, leaving behind a city that looked like it had been dipped in ink. Every statue, every brick, and every tree was coated in a greasy, black soot. But the air was clear. The Great Smog forced the passage of the Clean Air Act of 1956. It was the first law of its kind in the world. It banned the burning of coal in certain smoke control areas. It forced factories to move out of the city centres. It changed the architecture of London. The classic fireplaces were boarded up, replaced by gas and electric heaters. The era of the pea souper was officially over. But the forgotten streets of 1952 still carry the memory. If you walk through some of the older parts of Whitechapel or Bermondsey today, you can still find buildings with black stains that won't come off. That isn't just doubt. That is the ghost of the 1952 smog. It is a reminder that the very air we breathe is a fragile gift.